There was a war that changed the world, but almost no one remembers it. A conflict that claimed millions of lives, redrew the map of global power, and whose echoes still reverberate today. Yet, it remains shrouded in shadow, sandwiched between two of history's most documented conflicts. This is the story of the Korean War, the conflict that shaped the Cold War, and why it's infamously known as the Forgotten War. As World War II ended, a fragile peace settled over a broken world. But in the Korean peninsula, a new tension was brewing. Liberated from Japanese rule, Korea was split in two along the 38th parallel. To the north, a communist state backed by the Soviet Union. To the south, a capitalist republic supported by the United States. This division wasn't just a line on a map. It was the first major fault line of a new global struggle, the Cold War. As the world polarized, the two Koreas, each claiming to be the peninsula's rightful ruler, stood on the brink. The North, under Kim Il-sung, dreamed of unification by any means necessary. The fuse was lit. On June 25, 1950, the world awoke to shocking news. North Korean forces stormed across the 38th parallel in a surprise invasion. The South Korean army, unprepared and outgunned, crumbled. Seoul, the capital, fell in just 3 days. The international community was stunned. Fearing the domino effect of communism spreading across Asia, the newly formed United Nations, led by the United States, made a historic decision to intervene. Troops from over a dozen countries were dispatched to defend South Korea. But this was no simple police action. As UN forces, under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, pushed the North Koreans back, they advanced deep into the north, approaching the Chinese border. This move provoked a giant. Mao Zedong's China, fearing a US-backed state on its doorstep, entered the conflict, sending hundreds of thousands of volunteer soldiers pouring across the Yalu River. The war transformed overnight. The front lines surged back and forth in a brutal tug-of-war. What began as a civil conflict had escalated into a proxy war between the world's superpowers. The Korean War was a glimpse into a terrifying new era of warfare. Cities were leveled, turning vibrant urban centers into landscapes of ruin and ash. Millions of civilians were displaced, becoming refugees in their own land, fleeing the relentless cycle of destruction. This was also a war of technological firsts. Jet fighters like the American F-86 Sabre and the Soviet MiG-15 dueled in the skies in the world's first large-scale jet-on-jet combat. Helicopters were used for the first time for medical evacuation, saving countless lives. Yet alongside this modern technology, soldiers endured brutal, close-quarters trench warfare reminiscent of World War I. It was a strange and deadly mix of old and new, a direct clash between global powers that carefully avoided the term World War, even as the stakes felt just as high. After 3 long, bloody years, the fighting finally ground to a halt. But it didn't end with a peace treaty. On July 27, 1953, an armistice was signed, a ceasefire that effectively froze the conflict in place. The border was re-established near the original 38th parallel, creating the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, a 2.5-mile-wide strip of land that remains the most heavily fortified border on Earth. The war technically never ended. The consequences were profound and permanent. South Korea, with massive international aid and a determined populace, rose from the ashes to become one of the world's leading economic and technological powerhouses. North Korea, however, retreated into isolation, becoming a secretive totalitarian state, perpetually locked in a Cold War mindset. A single nation, a shared culture, was now divided by an impenetrable wall of ideology and military might, a division that persists to this day. So, why is a war of this scale, with such lasting impact, called the Forgotten War? Several factors contribute to this collective amnesia. First, there was no clear victory. Unlike World War II's triumphant parades, the Korean War ended in a stalemate. A bitter and unsatisfying draw that didn't fit a simple narrative of good versus evil. There were no victory arches to march through. Furthermore, its timing was unfortunate. It was overshadowed by the immense scale of World War II, which had just ended, and soon eclipsed by the media-intensive, politically divisive Vietnam War that followed. For the Western public, It was easier to simply turn the page on this complicated, unresolved conflict. Tragically, this meant that the veterans who fought and bled in Korea often returned home not to fanfare, but to silence. Their immense sacrifices went largely unrecognized for decades, their stories lost in the historical gap. But while people may have forgotten, history did not. The Korean War was the moment the Cold War went global and got hot. It solidified the American policy of containment, the strategy of preventing the spread of communism worldwide. It spurred a massive increase in US military spending and led to the strengthening of NATO as a credible military alliance. More importantly, it cemented the US military presence in Asia and laid the groundwork for the complex, tense relationships that define the region today. The triangular dynamic between the United States, China, and North Korea, with its constant threat of nuclear escalation, has its roots directly in the unresolved battles of the 1950s. The war didn't just divide Korea, it drew the lines for decades of global tension. History doesn't forget, even when people do. The Korean War was not just a distant conflict in a faraway land. It was a mirror of the world we were to become, a world of proxy wars, ideological divides, and the constant threat of superpower confrontation. It's a somber reminder that forgetting the past doesn't erase its consequences. It only risks repeating its mistakes. Remembering this forgotten war isn't just about honoring the fallen, it's about understanding the world we live in right now. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a crucial, yet overlooked piece of our shared history. If you found this story insightful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you next time.